do it in the circular. I would love if I could do it.
That's pretty ridiculous.
You should see my work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good process.
I wish I didn't know it was a subject. Let me run home. So how do you pronounce your first name? Ida?
Oh, you mean my username?
Yeah.
No, it's,
Yeah, right.
I
Push. That should, even though it says push, it's push says push.
yeah, no, it's, is just, would be my name, Sesquich is
Okay.
very, very close.
Okay.
You know,
I just didn't know, so.
maybe John Madden.
Yeah, I grew up in Needles, California. We used to always have all the Navajos down there. I made big couture graves and sheep ironized coding and did the Keep America Beautiful campaign and pictures of them, but now it's just like everybody's gone. Yeah, you don't see them at all.
Anybody tuning into the live will be starting here in just a little while. We're just waiting for some people to filter in and take some seats. We've just got a couple coming in, so we'll get started here in just a little while.
You didn't see this week.
Right?
For sure.
Oh, nice. Because that was good for the kids. Yeah, for sure. It was because the old lady said, I used to like straight to it, but now I'm all past it. Oh my God, that's why they have it. Because it's something. I go, you too.
We're good?
Okay, my name is Larry Sesovich. My last name, Sesovich, means white belly in youth. My grandpa had a big white birthmark on his tummy, and that was his youth name, Sesovich. It's a long name, you say the whole thing is Sesovich. And so when they enrolled us, we go up and they say our name, and if it was too long, chopped it in half, so that's how we end up with Sesovich. But means the same thing. They just cut off the left on the end. I've been doing these sessions last year. This is the second season of doing these every month, and try to do it the second Friday of each month. Last Friday I was supposed to be traveling, and we got snowed out. The plane got canceled. So we moved it to today. During all those sessions, I've had people ask about eating. So today I thought, okay, let's go ahead and do some eating. I don't eat myself. Everything that I have is given to me, and so I just get to wear all the good stuff. And those that eat, those that do it professionally, I mean, they get good money for what they do. You can't get anything of any kind of quality for less than $50 or more. It goes up from there. Like some of the beaded bells, I should throw one. That was $1,000. And the lady that made it, she's gone now, but she has some stuff of her work back in the Smithsonian. And so those are keepsakes and the other ones. And so beadwork is really precious. It's like jewelry or diamonds to us. And so when our people first started doing any kind of design work, we used to use quills, porcupine quills. You all know what porcupine quills look like, right? Sharp point on it, and it's got a little hook on it to where once it goes in, you can't pull it out. What you do, you've got to rip it out. And poor dogs and those that have to learn the hard way not to bother porcupines. That hurts pretty bad. So like the porcupine quill, what they do is the quill is like this. They cut it off that point, and they cut off the end that comes disconnected to the porcupine. And so you just end up with a section of it. And they put it in water, they soak it. You see a lot of the ones that do it will put it in their mouth and let it soak while they're getting ready to apply it. So they're sitting there with the whole mouth full of quills, and then they get them out, and they're really pliable then. And so they're like staples. You know how staples look like this? Well, these are still straight, but they bend them and they tack one end down, then they take the other end and tack it down. And so that's how this was done. This is my pipe bag. I took my pipe out because that's not something you share with everybody. But I'm going to come around and show you this because only I handle this because it's sacred. And so for streaming, I'll show you. And so you can see how each of these are done. This one here who did it was very good. they could do pretty intricate work. And you could about see, once I pass it around, I'm going to fold it so you can see the backside and how they had to do things. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see here.
While he's passing that around, here's some other beadwork that he brought with him.
And then they use different kind of plants and roots to dye them with different colors. And so the lady who gave me this is gone now, but on the venture she probably paid about $3,000, maybe $5,000 for this when she got it.
So where's the porcupine quill? Is it the base?
All of it.
Each,
Each one of those.
and they dye them?
Yes.
Wow. So they can,
It's kind of flattened like, aren't they?
Yeah.
Flat. As opposed to cylindrical.
I don't do this too often because it's bending the quilt.
right.
So you can see how she had to tack them down.
Uh-huh.
Boy, the stitching is pretty.
By hand.
All by hand, yes. So, see, quill work. See all of these. This is normally how quills look flat. She's
Yeah, I was
bending
surprised. I thought it was
where
just like ornaments.
get all of this.
He showed it to me. I was
Of
like,
course, this is the way the quill is flat. But you can see she's
how they did how she did.
laid them over each other. With the work that she had.
How that was holding.
What it looks like inside.
Yes.
Stitching she's done. Mrs. Horsehair. These are pretty much like these. Takes the quill, so she's twisted them. Where she is kind of bad. That's where they're final.
It's really a
I know. It was so cold this morning last night.
we're not supposed to get above which is kind of amazing. It's like 29 in the car. And then at night,
For those of you just now tuning in, Larry is just showing around his own personal pipe bag. It was handmade for him. And he will be back to present momentarily.
I didn't wear this to swim this morning. I changed to this for the second half of the day. Because it's bright scarf.
You say, you have one more chance to put your green on if you're gonna go out.
No, it'll be fun. I've just spent too many years in bars, and I'm so interested.
Well, that's like my daughter, she doesn't.
Well, I haven't been in one for a long time, so this is a
No, I hadn't either. This was the first time. I got to see them the first time they played. It was like, it had been decades since I had been in one too.
Roadkill is our dinner.
No, I'll do that, get on the floor all the
get rest tomorrow.
I don't think they even know, like, they can't see because out there's no lights. And then,
Really?
yeah, and they don't know who's there, and then during ambush.
So after the quill work is when the beads start coming in. So when the Spaniards came into Union Country in the 1600s, they had beads. And then when the trappers, fur trappers came, then of course they had more beads. And of course there were big trades for a few beads because it was new to us native people, but we didn't realize what we were giving up for those beads. And so nowadays when you think of a few beads for all of this, it don't equate. And but it's done. And so they brought in the beads, and first beads were bigger beads, sort of like these ones here that the kids have, that were used for the kids. Probably a little smaller than this, but we were able to make some designs for us to use. What colors we got first with the 4 basic colors, and that's black, white, red, and yellow. And so a lot of the old beadwork, youth beadwork, you'll find have these basic colors. And so that's what we started out, and so I had to order these basic colors. Since you're all in youth country, you're going to use youth colors. And so we'll pass these around when it comes time. This first little clip I'm going to show you would be how this was done. And you can see that a pattern is drawn out first. A lot of them do it on tracing paper to where you can see it. And this style here is called peyote stitch, and I'll show you that in a minute. So this is 2 different kinds of beadwork. The ladies that do it, mostly ladies, but there are a few men who can really whip it out. And I'll pass this around, y'all can look at it. So I'm going to let this roll and see how this is done.
By the end of the 1870s, millions of bison had been slaughtered as a means to starve off the indigenous people of the land. By the end of the 19th century, there were only a few hundred in the wild. I wanted these pieces to make a statement because fashion has been used for centuries for political and sociological discourse. Fashion is expression and symbolism, and fashion can be used to tell a story, much like beadwork. And despite the efforts to exterminate the bison, they're still alive and thriving today, just like the indigenous people of Turtle Island. Hi, thank you for watching. Let's be some custom here, actually. Beading has a very long artistic and cultural history among indigenous people. traditionally used as a storytelling device. With that, I wanted to be intentional with these pieces because of where they'll make their appearance. These cuffs are a beaded representation of the bison genocide that took place in the late 1800s. A tragedy enacted by American settlers that killed the animal to near extinction. I chose to put a lone bison in the prairie. The design placed in the middle a nod to the American flag, which speaks to the U.S. government who encouraged the slaughter of the bison as a strategy to conquer the American Indians. By the end of the 1870s, millions of bison had been slaughtered as a means to starve off the indigenous people of the land. By the end of the 19th century, there were only a few hundred in the wild. I wanted these pieces to make a statement because fashion has been used for centuries for political and sociological discourse. Fashion is expression and symbolism, and fashion can be used to tell a story, much like beadwork. And despite the efforts to exterminate the bison, they are still alive and thriving today, just like the indigenous people of Turtle Island. Thank you for watching.
So the next piece I'm going to show you is a peyote stitch, which is the one that's on the neck piece for that one and this one here. Did you check that? Okay. Thank you. So this is peyote stitch, and it's usually used to make like ropes with for circular things. And I'll pass this around and I'll play it. I had told some of the ladies back there that my daughter does quill work, and she does quill work, and so if she sees any roadkill porcupines, she'll look around and go and get it, and she'll pluck them all out. The quills are mainly here in the tail, and so that's where you have to get them out of. Usually it's all right here through the back and the tail, and some people think that the quills can be thrown at you. They can't. They have to make contact with you because of the barb, and once the barb gets in you, you can't get it out. You should pull it out. And so she'll sit there and take all those quills out. Sticker from having it pull it out of you, from pulling it out of the porcupine. It's not so hard. She's really knows, and she's plucking them all out. It's time consuming. All of this is time consuming.
Peyote stitch. Okay, now to start this beading, we're using artificial sinew, and we want to take an arm's length, something that's long enough that you can work with. Too long, it gets uncomfortable. So cut about an arm's length, maybe a little bit longer. Okay, that's about 3 or so feet. Now with this sinew, we want to tear it apart.
And that was our original thread.
And we put this aside and do that again. We'll get about 4 strips from this one piece of sinew. Okay, we're using a number 11, and you want to string an even number of beads on your thread. And we need to have enough to go around and still be loose. Now there's been a few times where I counted wrong and I had too many beads, and rather than try to untie, what I do is take my pliers or side cuts and snap one of the beads rather than try to unthread or untie. Okay, you can see there I have about a 1/4 inch gap. And what I'm going to do now is move the beads towards the end of the thread. I'm hanging on to the one end. And now what I'm going to do is take my needle and start threading through these and go all the way around.
Time consuming.
I don't think you noticed, I did not count the number of beads. So if it's off, I'll snap one of the beads, like I was saying earlier, with my pliers. Now I'm tying the end. Now to start, I'm going to make a black band, so I'm going to go around this a few times with black. So we pick up a bead, we work one bead at a time. What I like to do is hide the knot. So I'm going to take this through a few of the beads. There, I picked up 4 of them. So now this is going to start away from the knot. So we take the one bead and we loop every other one. And you can see I'm skipping every other. Pick a bead up. It's coming out here, goes across that one. Past this one. And thread this one. A bead up. First row might be a little hard to see. When we get to the next row, it'll be a lot easier, more obvious. This is the coyote stitch, and I'm sewing it on a Cheyenne coyote rattle. This is the start, this last one, and I had a 50-50 chance of being right or wrong. So I am am correct, I don't have to break one of my beads. Now that's probably an unorthodox method that I do, breaking the beads, but I found that's the simplest way. Now, I need to come up for my third row, that we just did the second row. The third row has to jump up. So if you look closely, let me zoom a little bit more in. Okay, if you look close, this is the bead I have to go through. Now, I'm going to go through this one, and I'm going to go through the first one that I started on the second row. So I'm going to go through 2 beads. This one, and then we have to go through the one on this row. So we went through 2 beads, that's jumped us up for the third row. Okay, now with this row, there's going to be a gap, and we fill the gap with a bead. And go through the same way. This is actually a lot easier now. And we'll go all the way around this way until we get to where we have to jump a bead. Like we just did, and that will jump us up to the 4th row. So we need a bead in there.
So y'all get the idea?
So,
We're gonna kind of speed this up,
It
the whole thing.
may seem a little loose, but as we add more beads and get a few more rows on there, this is going to tighten up and squeeze the handle, squeeze the leather on really tight.
Okay, look for that. Ladies are the people that bead though, when they do this, you watch them, I'm a filmmaker, man, they'll go pretty fast.
Right
It's just
there,
that first bit.
right there. And now we add our bead. Right now we're working. Now that I'm working different colors, might be a little easier to see, but as you continue around and you need to jump to the next row, that's where you have to feed it through 2 beads, one on this level and one up here. So it's going to go through this one, and that one. And this sometimes is where you need pliers to pull through. Right there. One thing I would like to point out when you're putting beads on is keeping the row of beads in a straight line. And if you're not careful how you're doing this, you can pull the bead and make them spiral. And what I do when I'm adding the bead, string the bead, then each bead is tightened, and I'll push the string upward, this direction. Most people have a tendency when they tighten the bead this way. Every time you do this, it nudges the whole group of beads in a spiral. So I will tighten that way each time. And one thing I would like to point out when you're putting beads on is keeping the row of beads in a straight line. And if you're not careful how you're doing this, you can pull the bead and make them spiral. And what I do when I'm adding the bead, string the bead, and each bead is tightened, and I'll push the string upward this direction. Most people have a tendency when they tighten the bead, they just go and pull it this way. Every time you do this, it nudges the whole group of beads. To finish the peyote weave, when you get to the very end, what you want to do is start going. This will strengthen the outer perimeter, and it also ties the cord. When you get all the way around, then work it back down through, and you can zigzag, go back and forth. And trim it. We're going to secure it. A couple drops of super glue. Okay, now, on here where we cut and added, we just take a flame and singe off the ends of the threads. This was how to bead with the peyote stitch. Thanks for watching, my friends. Bye-bye.
You guys gonna be able to do that? This is what he was talking about, the sinew. This here is deer sinew. It's the cartilage that allows our legs and deer to be able to hop. And I'll pass this around, you can see. And so you just take this, just one strand. This is old sinew, so it might break. Yeah. But anyway, you can see. I'll show you here.
And do beaters today still use the sinew?
No, I was surprised he used the sinew, but he makes it look so easy. So you just take a piece, thread of this, and in the video you can see this is old, so that's why it broke off. But he would have taken one of this, and this is how it was done in the beginning. Our people started doing beadwork, and this is how they also tacked down the quills, was with the sinew. people who bead, who have done it for a long time, a lot of them put their design on graphing paper. And so they make out their design so they know exactly what they're going to bead. There are some, I have a pair of moccasins that I'm going to have made, and the design is what my uncle had when I was little. He was the one who taught me how to dance, or dances, and he had a pair of moccasins made the same design that he has. And so I'm going to have a pair made, so I have to draw out that whole design for who I'm going to ask to make them. So, but the ones that have beaded for a long time, all you got to do is go say, well, I'd like to have this made. And they can tell you just up here, because they've done it so much, it's just math. You'll need about, say, 5 hanks of blue turquoise. You'll probably need about maybe a hank of yellow. But they could tell you down to a T how many beads you'd need to be able to do something. And that's how their mind works. And just like this guy who did his, thank you. This guy who did his, he pretty much knew how much he was going to need, so he didn't have to break off any. But the ones that do it all the time, they can just look at it and can tell you exactly what they're going to need, and sure enough. So there's no wasting of anything. Next example I'm going to show you is what's called lazy stitch, and it's how they've done this moccasin here, and how they've done this buckle. So I'll pass these around. But lazy stitches, where they'll lay down so many beads. In this case, there's probably about 10 beads on this row here. And so they'll just lay 10 beads across and tack it, and then they go back and tack like every 4 beads. Just depends on how tight you want it to adhere to your buckskin. And so some work is just really tight, like the guy's peyote stitch. And they hide all their ends and everything to where you can't see where they began and ended or anything. But that's how these were done. And so they're done a row at a time, and then they're tacked down not every other, about 4 at a time. So they'd go in like 4 and tack those down, go 4 and tack those down. So.
Series of videos. This one will be just on lazy stitch. The vest I'm wearing is lazy stitch. My son made this probably 5-6 years ago as a gift for me. But I have some other examples here on the table that I want to share with you before we get started in actual stitch. This nice little Lakota doll. It's a reproduction. The yoke is all lazy stitch, her belt, right down to the moccasins and her leggings. A very fine example.
Here's a bag. It's done, it's a rosette, but it's done in the lacy stitch style, as well as the top, and then the strap. This piece here was once a pipe bag. It would have a nice long top and quill work at the bottom, but this guy's seen better days. But I just wanted to show you this example. It's a fine piece of beadwork done on brain tan with real sinew, even the little feather detail at the top. That's a form of lazy stitch. It's just not in a straight lane stitch. This is a lane, and each row of beads is a row. So multiple lanes, and we'll do that with the stitch that I'll show you next. The project for today is going to be a necktie. We're going to stop beading at the bottom. I'm going to show you that technique. We're going to do a few stitches at the bottom so you get the general idea of how to stop, how to end, how to add a thread. And the very bottom where we've got diamonds working out is going to look similar to the diamonds here. We're using Tenno seed beads today, nice cobalt blue that we're going to use for the edge on this tie. And here's white. We pull a pile of white beads off so we can use those. We're using Tenno seed beads, so I can use a Tenno beading needle with Nymo thread. Fits through the needle nicely, and I'm going to put plenty of wax on this guy. And the beeswax helps the thread not tangle. I like pulling it through 2 or 3 times. I have a knot at one end. So basically, I'm going to start at the bottom. So I want to hide my thread. I want to hide the knot. So I'm going to put my stitch on top of the work. And go right to the point. So now, as I pull that thread through, I'm going to bead over the knot so you won't see it. And basically, with this technique, and I'm using smoked brain tan deerskin, I'm only going to bead halfway through. So the back will have no knots, no thread will pop through. So I'm happy with that. So I have put 9 beads on my needle. And as you can see, that guy will line up nicely with my line that I have already drawn. I'm going to keep my needle to the right side of this line. And I did not go through the leather. That's the advantage of the brain tan. Pull that guy tight. So that's the first row in this lane. Another 9 beads. And I'm going to go to leave a little bit of space from my previous row. I want them to bunch up. I want them to be spaced out nicely. And when you start a project, make sure you have enough beads of the particular color for the dye lots. Dye lots will change. Every time we import beads, the dye lots change. You would think blue is blue, but blue does not always come back in as blue. So I have another 9 beads on. Slide it right next to that black line. I like to keep the beads on the original factory hank. Keeps them neat. Slide them right back in the original bag. And if you buy beads from us, which I hope you do, if you keep the bag, it has a code number on it, and we can match that bead for the most part, except for a potential die lot variation, which we have no control over. So in buying beads for a project, make sure you buy enough the first time. It's nice to have extra, opposed to scrambling in the end to fill in a color that is just not available in the country.
You see, he's lined all his design out, so all he's got to do is just go up those lines and.
So once again, halfway through that leather, I like to bend it a little bit to keep that needle straight.
Just got it all
Pull that guy
right.
tight.
Just do it.
And one more row, and then I'm going to jump into the blue.
I'm going to speed this forward.
Front, I'm going to bead over it. So I'm going to cut this thread off. I'm going to retie my knot that I have my thread right in my hands. And I make a loop, take my tail, stick it through the loop, and give that guy a pull right there. That's what I like. So now I'm going to snip off the excess. Going to wax my thread again. All right, so this lane is going in this direction, but I need to travel this way. So we're going to do an opposite direction. Once again, I'm going to start on top. I'm going to slide the needle to basically where I want to stop that first row of blue. I'm going to pull that guy tight. So now I'm going to start with blue. 10 beads. Going to slide them up to here. Go halfway through the leather. See, I'm giving it a little bend. If you were beading on canvas, you would have to go all the way through the leather, pull your needle out the bottom, slide it over, push it back up. Much more time consuming. Brain tan is expensive, but the results are far better than beading on canvas. I'll do a couple more rows here of the blue. And my 10 beads on. Basically said that he could do 7 inches of lazy stitch in an hour. So 7 inches in one lane. So if you look at my vest, there's plenty of 7-inch lanes. I don't know how many hours he could probably tell you that he has in the vest. It's worth using quality materials and doing a nice job if you want end results to look good. We produced this book a little while ago. It's rewritten from an old version. And in the back is our lazy stitch techniques. So originally this was done in the early 1950s, before color photographs that were being printed. So there was some black and white sketches. We kept the sketches. We added some color. And here's the back of the vest that I'm wearing right here. And some other fine examples of lazy stitch. So this is in the Plume book. And we sell it for, I believe, $5, $6. Relatively inexpensive. Once again, this is Chris Bullock in the Wandering Bull. Thanks for watching. This is the lazy stitch technique. Most of the Plains tribes did lazy stitch. It was applied to moccasins, vests, all kinds of items. Check us out on Facebook and also check out our Instagram. Thanks a lot and happy beading.
What I'm going to show you now is loom, because for the kids here, you have these that you'll be using these beads with. And when it comes time, I have to come pick some colors, and
All right, I've been working on this one for a while now. I'm happy I can finally share it with you. This is everything you need to know to get started with loom beading for absolute beginners. First up, let's talk about supplies. You'll need some scissors to cut your thread. You'll need your loom. This is about $10 at just about any craft store. There are much fancier looms available online, but this is going to be your most economical option. Beading thread is a nylon thread. There's the label in case you need that, but I bought this at Bill Ward Furs. Your beads, mine are always mixed in a package because this is how I distribute them to students so they don't fight over colors. And beading needles. Beading needles are specific to the job because they're very, very thin and they need to be able to fit through the tiny beads. These are size 10 beading needles and these are size 10 beads. Okay, I cut out the width of beads I'm going to do, which is 9 beads wide, and now I'm going to color the design I'm going to use. I do this to plan my path through because as we bead one row at a time. It's not always easy once you end up with complex patterns. It's always best to plan it out first. Okay, so because I've got a repeating pattern, I'm not going to keep going. This is enough to tell me what I need to do. Now I need to thread my loom. We're going to need to know how long of a project we're making. You will obviously need a longer strand of thread for a lanyard than a bracelet. Once we know how long we want to make it, we need one more length of thread than we're going to have width of beads. I'm going to say that again. We need one more thread, then we're going to have width of beads. Let me explain that one more other way. This pattern here is 9 beads wide, therefore I need 10 warp threads across my loom so that every bead has a thread on each side of it. So now I'm going to cut my 10 threads, all the same length, in my case about 30 centimeters or 12 inches. So now I've got my 10 strands of thread and I'm going to knot them at one end. Once I've got that nice knot at one end, I'm going to do the other end, but I want to make sure the tension stays consistent on every thread. So I'm going to pull this end instead of this end so that I know there is a tight tension on every thread as I pull that tight. And there it is, knotted at both ends. Now I can split these in half, 5 threads to a side, and loop over my loom. I'm going to twist it a little bit to make sure it's nice and tight, and tighten up this wing nut here so it doesn't turn back the way it came. Then I'll loop the other side onto the other nail and repeat that process. Finally, I'm going to make sure these are nice and tidy, so I'm going to ensure they run perfectly parallel to one another. And there you have it. They're all spaced nicely across. Now just a note, I generally do this step for my students or my workshop participants because it can be a bit finicky and I find participants get frustrated before they've even started. So instead, I set the looms up for them, and then once they've completed their beadwork and they see how fun and easy it is, then I show them how to set up their next loom. So it's about getting their investment early. I have my loom threaded here. I now need a length of beading thread, about 50 centimeters or 3 feet-ish, and I need my size 10 beading needle.
Of course, the needles you use for this are...
Now remember I said beading needles are extremely thin. Unfortunately for you, that means the eye of the needle is also very thin. Here's a few tips to threading the needle. First thing I like to do is hold the thread so close to the end that I can't even see it. That way, I can wiggle the eye of the needle onto the thread instead of trying to stab the thread through the needle, which never works very well. Then, if you're having issues still, and the thread just does not want to go in, try turning the needle to the other side, because eyes of needles are drilled, and sometimes there's invisible barbs preventing your needle from being threaded. Finally, if you're still having trouble, try the other end of your thread. Thread is wound in a certain direction, and it threads more easily through a needle in that direction. And I think for me, that was my issue. There we go. I put those all on in order. I can double check that they match my design. And then place them each into their parking spots on the loom. Now I will tell you, the first maybe 2 rows are the most difficult to get the spacing kind of locked in, and after this it does get easier. So don't lose faith if you have to play with these a little bit to get them into their parking spots. All right, there we go. Now let's take a moment to realize these beads now have a thread running through them that is running underneath the warp threads, right? Because we placed the beads up from the bottom, so the thread running through them is running underneath these warp threads. To secure these beads in place, I want to put a thread that runs over top of them through the middle of them. So I'm pushing them up pretty aggressively from the bottom while I run my needle back through the middles of all of them, trying to make sure my needle is on top of those warp threads. So now each bead has a thread running through it, above it, and below it. And that is it for the first row. You can see how we're going to get our tension correct here once we get a couple of rows in. Then I'm going to read up the next row. Turquoise, white, white, purple, pink, purple, white, white, turquoise. So I need to start at this side and add the beads in that order onto my needle. Now that I've got all my beads in the correct order, I need to pass my needle under the loom so that I can push these guys up into their parking spots from below. Once they're all in their correct spots, I push them up from the bottom with my left hand here and run my needle back through the centers of all of them, taking good care to make sure my needle is always on top of those warp threads. Pull it nice and tight, and you can see I've got my second row. When I feel my project is long enough, I'm ready to be finished, I'm going to bury that thread just like I did when I ran out of thread. I'm going to show you 2 ways of finishing this. The first one is a little bit simpler. It's going to end our beadwork just abruptly, like straight across as it is. And the second way is this way, which I've already done so that you can see it. But I'm going to show you that in a second. First, let's just get down the general idea of how to get this side going. So this is my very, very original little tail from my very first bead. I put my needle on that thread, and I'm going to bury this thread just like we've gotten so good at doing. Once again, you don't really need to or really want to go through every single bead of every single row. It doesn't help you because later we're going to be threading even more threads through your beads, and it gets kind of crowded in the middle of the beads if you choose to do it that way. Okay, that's fairly secure. I'm going to cut that off. Now that I have no threads anywhere coming off of here, it's safe to loosen these wing nuts and release the beadwork. In this case, I'm going to add a bracelet clasp. There are probably hundreds of ways you can finish the ends of your beadwork. I'm giving you 2 today. Okay, here's our lovely work. Don't worry about this sliding down here. We're going to make sure that's all secure in just a second. If you recall when we first started, we tied a knot in all our threads. My knot is still there. Now I'm going to cut it off. Leaving nice long threads. Long threads are good. If you cut them off here, oof, that is a bad day.
All right. I'm going to show one more, but I'm going to get these kids started on some beadwork here. So you've seen how to do it, right? So come on up and get some colors. say probably not get too much, because we're not gonna be able to do too much today.
Yeah.
So wrap up here in about,
Yeah, but like, you know, it's
want to get,
we're about to sleep in out 15 minutes.
Do you need? Yep, I got you.
How are you, Sam? Doing well. Come down and check out the bead work. I've seen students do this at school. I've never done it.
First up?
Yeah.
this screen. So what I would say is probably.
Is that right?
We're gonna see a lot of each other in a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, we'll see a lot of each other.
We hope so. Well, I will. I'm sure we'll know what we're not.
Feels like spring out there. It's nice.
It feels like it, but there's nothing to do. I know this is.
No, that was for Vernal. You saw.
Oh, I don't know what he intended, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know. They are gorgeous, yeah. I'm so jealous. Did you do them or not?
I bought trade show for cars. I think it was just like the son's workshop.
All right, well, let the kids get started on those. If you want to come and get what you need for, I would suggest doing something like this. Just start in the middle and just do a spiral. And so to start in the middle, go round and round and round and round.
Is that lazy?
Yeah, let's go back and you tap them down like every 2 or 3. It just depends on what looks good to you. So here's the belt that you'll need to be able to do that. You come grab them here. Come grab your beads. Thread is here. I have some beeswax that you'll thread your, put on your thread. Come help yourself. And you've got all those little trays so you can pour out however many beads you want to use and go for it.
Alrighty. Alright guys, that was Larry Says Pooch with the Native Experience. Thanks for tuning in.